Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of CX on Point with Precision Point Partners. Hello, Ken Epstein. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Alicia? Good to see you.
Doing good. I'm excited about this one. This is
I am
this is a
too.
good one. This is
Yeah,
a good one. So they're all good, but this one's going to be amazing.
I
So
think it's going to be
with
very
us is someone that I know you've known for a long time, and I've known for a bit as well. Tim Cronin. So welcome, Tim. I'm going to give your background before we kick it over to you. So if you don't know Tim Cronin, he has really championed some of the most innovative thinking in the world of sourcing and procurement. So we're excited to have Tim Cronin here. He was the chief procurement officer at many very large brands that I'm sure you've heard of, and really been at the forefront of looking at CX outsourcing in different and unique ways. And it's so great to have you here, Tim, because as you know, we're talking about the evolution and the revolution of this industry. So I'm really excited to hear what you have to say as it relates to sourcing.
Great. Thank you for having me on the podcast today, Alicia and Ken. Glad to be here.
always good to see you, Tim. I've always enjoyed our conversations, and a lot of what we've been discussing on these podcasts has been to coin Alicia's term, evolution or revolution, depending on how radical you want to be about it. But the business that we are in today, like so many others, has just evolved. It's completely different than it was 10 years ago. And when we talk about the world of CX and we talk about the world of contact centers and we talk about the world of BPO, very often we don't take it to the nth degree and think about the whole sourcing, contracting, procurement piece, which is a very integral part of the entire process. I don't know many people that have more experience in that world than you. Very impressive career. We worked together in the past. And I just am so anxious to hear your thoughts about the evolution of procurement, things like cost cutting, supply risk, the criticality of suppliers and innovation, business model dependence, and some of the things we've talked about. Share with me what's going on, man.
Yeah, no, appreciate it. And then again, like I said before, thanks for having me to kind of discuss procurement and how it intersects with the business and specifically about CX and the BPO world. And you're absolutely right. I mean, there has been such evolution. I even like the word revolution in the past couple decades. I love kind of researching the history of business and different functions, and take procurement as a function. Really kind of started to evolve in like the late 50s, 60s, and I guess I have to say 1950, 1960, considering we're in the 2000s now. But it has evolved, to the point now where it's a whole different function and industry than it was back then. And I'd like to say that even though evolution brings in new ideas, procurement, just like every other function, can also be in seasons. There are seasons when you're in cost-cutting mode. There are seasons when you have to really worry about supply risk. We just went through one of those with the global pandemic. But I think there's some keys to procurement and BPO and the interaction with the business and other stakeholders that is consistent and needs to be optimized in today's world, just because the world has changed so much, and companies are dependent on serving the end customers, and that's what BPO and CX is designed to do. And we're happy. We love supporting that from a procurement and a strategic sourcing perspective.
They say the more things change, the more they stay the same. So it's how do you find better ways to accomplish the same outcomes, or maybe accomplish them better than you did before?
Correct. And there's so many theories and models that have evolved. I can speak more about some of the procurement ones. You have the 7-step sourcing process. You have a lot of different things, and one that I've been really excited about over the past probably decade has been this idea of vested sourcing. And it started with outsourcing, and it's been a game changer in terms of the relationships, really kind of moving relationships to being confrontational, to being more collaborative and more trusting. And it's done more, not just because of great relationships that you may have with companies, but it's done more as a business model so that it can be lasting generationally. So, so those types of things are super exciting in the business world today.
You know, you talk about collaboration and trust in relationships. As a sourcing or procurement person, you have to do that internally. You have clients, you have business folks, you have to kind of rally everybody together. I'm sure that's got to present enormous challenges.
You know, it does. And I think the first challenge starts, you know, inside yourself. We talk about collaboration, we talk about trust, but then what does everybody naturally go back to is I want to win. And you know, that happens externally, and like you said, that happens internally. And some of the more difficult negotiations we have are internal. If you think about setting budgets and setting, you know, roles and responsibilities, and those are difficult, and we're on the same team. Now take that same mentality and expand it beyond the four walls of the enterprise to the supply chain. That's something that, you know, it's taken an evolution in procurement mindset to make that a reality. There's an old adage that, you know, they say in negotiations, the true goal is, you know, to not to split the pie, but to make the pie bigger. But what you really have to kind of guard against is still not trying to get 51% of the pie versus 49% of the pie. Now, don't get me wrong. There's some times when you want to negotiate and you want to hammer, and it's still fun. Like, don't get me wrong. Everybody still enjoys it. But for these critical functions that can define risk, reputation, performance inside of a company, you have to think differently, and that's what we've started to do in the procurement space.
I'm sure you have, you know, getting back to the concept of the internal group, you have to sell sometimes people within your own organization because you have varying opinions on what we should do. And I guess at the end of the day, you're the judge, right? I mean, as the folks in sourcing, you're supposed to make the recommendations and say, here's why we think we should go with this particular solution, right? I mean,
well, that depends a little bit. At the end of the day, I think you can make the argument that the function that controls the budget and controls the outcomes is really the end judge. Yes, procurement, legal, compliance, we play critical roles in terms of making sure that, you know, good decisions are made and appropriate risks are taken when they are needed to be taken. But I think you're absolutely right. You know, we've had to change the mindset from, you know, going back in the days. I've worked with some companies that literally would get sealed bids and open them up at 11:59 at, you know, right before midnight, and the lowest price won, whether it was good quality, bad quality, they answered the question, they didn't answer the question. You've evolved to like three bids. You know, the old thing is called three bids in a cloud of dust, and you just try to get through that as fast as possible. And the reality is now we're moving and innovating in terms of, you know, really defining, you know, what we need to buy in terms of outcomes, not how the outsourcer will do it. You know, we need to set these things up so that they are flexible and living relationships, because business changes, and you know what you hard bidded on 6 months ago may not be applicable now. So you know, those are types of things that, you know, the flexibility mindset with procurement, kind of pushing that with you know, with other functions which may or may not be flexible, and ultimately bringing that back to the business unit and to the end customer is what's critically important.
yeah. You and I did have a conversation a couple of weeks ago where we were talking about sourcing in the new economy.
Mm-hmm.
Again, evolution, revolution, it is a new economy. AI, for instance, I mean, there's got to be a place for AI in sourcing. We went from the old school, let's send Tim, you know, our bid and wait for him to open it at 11:59 p.m. And select it, to getting into things like, you know, systems like a platform like Ariba, for instance. But it continues to evolve. Where are we today? And talk to me a little bit about sourcing a new economy.
Yeah, so first of all, I have to give credit to that term, sourcing in the new economy. That's not something that like we made up. That actually comes from research, driven by the University of Tennessee Executive Education. Kate Vitasic is a great friend of mine, along with Carl Manrod and Mike Ledyard, who started this years ago. And they've coined this term, sourcing in the new economy, and it's so appropriate. I've used it, for years at companies I've worked at. And you're right, it is a change in the mindset in terms of looking at the specific purchases and categories or functions that you're going to outsource, joint venture, perform internally. It really it's expanding beyond procurement to really look at, how do we best situate these functions to provide value back to the enterprise, based on the relationship that we want to have, and the outcomes that we want to get out of it. So it really has challenged procurement to kind of look outside of just procurement policy and procurement methodology to really kind of determine what is the best relationship that we have going forward. Sometimes that's internally. But going back to what we talked about earlier, this hockey stick of evolution that we're talking about, bringing in generative AI, all of the data, both that's qualitative and quantitative, and bringing that into the decision-making process. Just the mind share of computational power that we have now that we didn't have 5 years ago with spreadsheets, and even past that when it was literally a notebook sitting in our in our bookshelves. That's made data more available to make better decisions, but I'll also argue that it's also complicated in a way because there's a lot more inputs that you have to bring into the process. And we don't want to be the roadblock to the business making decisions. We don't want to get analysis paralysis and spend months and months and months going through data. But we really want to kind of utilize these new tools, these AI tools for autonomous sourcing, to be able to make our process more effective and efficient. And then we can spend more time on building the relationships internally and externally, things that you can't do with a computer, things that still have to be done, person to person and, relationship to relationship. So it's really changed what a procurement professional needs to do today.
Yeah, we talk about with lots of folks when we talk about AI and different AI tools, we never leave human in the loop out of the conversation, because
Correct.
you have to have a human in the loop. At least today you do. Maybe at some point it'll just become so advanced that it really will, and then we all need to watch out anyway.
Yes.
We're awful long way from using an abacus. I do see where the additional data can make it less simple. It's not simplistic. Now you have a lot more to consider, which is again probably why you need a human in the loop, because AI tools and machines can give you data and give you a lot of facts and stuff to look at and to analyze. But at the end of the day, I still think it takes either a person or a group of people to sit, analyze that data and say, okay, what's going to drive the best outcome? And I like the term outcomes that you're using. We think it's very important. Just what we're doing, for instance, is CX as a service. And CX as a service, and you and I had a conversation about that, is
Right.
really all about what drives the outcome. It's not a particular component. There's dozens of components that go into to driving an outcome. We even talked with you about things we can do as a service to satisfy sourcing and procurement folks when we go in, to take a lot of the heavy lifting away from them. So I love the concept of working from the end back. What's the outcome we want and how are we going to get it? You and I also talked about educating executives within the groups so that they understand what's going on, so that you can get the best possible outcome, right? So you can have them come to the best conclusion. What are you against? What are you up against when you're doing that?
I think what we're up against just in general, and this is within procurement, it's within other functions, it's with the supplier as well. It's this idea of the juxtaposition of control versus trust. And at the end of the day, I've had a lot of experience in regulated industries, financial services, healthcare. But whether you sell, soda or hammers or things like that, everybody's regulated in some way, especially with the proliferation of cyber risk and privacy rules that are coming in the United States and in Europe and things like that. So everybody's regulated one way or the other. But so that idea of control really comes back to from an integrity perspective, if something happens, God forbid, at an outsourcing company, it's the company that purchased the service that's ultimately on the hook for it. Now, obviously, there's legal ramifications and there's the relationship within the contract between the two, but the reputation is across the board in the supply chain. So the idea of letting go of control, I think sometimes is a little bit challenging. For years and years and years, we've written BPO contracts like this, and we've never had a problem. So why should we change the way we contract with BPO companies? Why do we want to go towards outcomes? They may, there's an idea that just because they don't wear the same, polo shirt that's got, my company's logo on it, they're going to think differently about it. Well, I'd make the argument then you probably don't have the right partner there. And, we need to make sure that that relationship is solid. So that idea of letting go of that control and kind of advocating on behalf of that. There's another kind of thought process I would say that's important. If you think about it, yes, we've run call centers, we've run, back office centers, we know how to do that. We have desktop procedures, we know that, but the companies that we partner with do this for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of other companies. So also letting go of some of that control and bringing in that trusting relationship can also bring innovation into the company for things that you may not think about, or maybe best of breed that you haven't implemented yet. So it really is a symbiotic relationship. But again, that risk aversion, I think, is one of the biggest things that we have to alleviate across the entire function. And it's not just it's not just legal, it's not just compliance, it's not just procurement, it's within the business too. I mean, ultimately, we're all on the hook for good performance and mitigating risk and managing risk. And sometimes it's easier to keep it in the family, but again, what do you lose out by not utilizing best of breed partners?
Yeah, it's a challenge I've had for 30 years, actually, because I started, as you know, many, many years ago, just in BPO. And when I started selling BPO services, people were like, "You mean you want me to outsource? You want control? You can," and everybody, "You can never do this better than we can. It's very complicated." And it
Right.
took a long time for business leaders to understand that in the BPO environment, we really are experts in running contact center operations, and that they can leverage the resources available across an entire enterprise through an outsourced partnership. But I'm not here to sell outsourcing. I'm just agreeing. Um, you talk about risk and mitigating risk, and I know that one of the I don't want to say challenges, but one of the biggest hurdles that we have always had in contracts is just that piece. It's liabilities. It's how much does that eat you guys up?
It's it's a lot of negotiation, it's a lot of work. It's a challenge because in some cases you can't find the win-win solution. Some of these negotiations are kind of binary. You either have it or you don't have it. And for people like me who's trying to find the win-win out of this, those are sometimes challenges, but they are important, no question. Creating the contract, having that in place for when, like I said, something goes wrong, unfortunately, it's important to have. And it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of thought. But at the end of the day, it also brings a lot of stress to the model because it does test the relationship early on. If you think about bringing on, a new partner, and, the first thing you're going to do before you even take the first call or click the first keystroke is you have to have an argument over limitation of liability and terms like that. I tell you, if you can get past that, you probably, are on the way to a pretty good relationship. And it's important for both companies. It's a necessary thing within the relationship. But this idea of bringing in, talk about evolutions in terms of like contracting, bringing in plain English contracts and bringing in contracts that, identify the risk and, you hate to say it, compensate sides one way or the other for who's taking risk and who's not. If you're able to think about contracts in a different way, it can make it, dare I say it, an enjoyable process. But at the end of the day, you're always waiting for the last minute for the same 4 clauses in a contract to get done, and it's a challenge, but it's part of life in the NBA. That's what we always kind of say.
Is that the first place you go looking for red lines?
It is. It's usually the first place you go looking for red lines, and probably the last place you end up negotiating, because you want to build momentum and you want to build all this, and then all of a sudden you end up with one of those clauses. But like I said, it's necessary. It shows a lot about the relationship, and kind of got to get through it.
Yeah, I think I've done 3 or 4 of these with you. I don't recall any fights, so I think we worked pretty well together.
Absolutely. Well, we always had good lawyers working with
That's
us
right.
also. So that's also a big key.
We did talk about, I think you referred to them as 5 rules. You want to kind of get into that a little bit, because I thought it was fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. And this again comes from the white papers from Kate and her team, kind of describing the vested sourcing process. And again, sourcing in the new economy is kind of a broader thing. But for certain relationships, the vested mentality is, what we've implemented at a couple of different companies I've worked with. And it really is, I think it's one of the economic theories that has leapt from just being a theory to actually being put into practice. So very functional for the businesses, very, I'd say very easy to understand. And, I think when both companies kind of come together and can kind of go through this process, and it is a process, no doubt, everybody can see, what we're trying to accomplish and what we're trying to get to. So the 5 rules are something that, you're always in the top of your head when you're kind of setting up these models. The first is, contracting and developing outcomes versus transactions. We've done, we'll go back to our past, Ken. We've done, tons of contracts that have been, all about transactions, a cost per minute, a dollar per hour, and in some models, those are right. The outcome that you want to get out of that is more about, let's call it labor arbitrage or capacity or something like that. But when we move into wanting to, elevate the relationship, contracting for the outcome ends up being more important. These are things like contracting for, net promoter score, something that you can impact immediately. It's above, just putting in SLAs, but really kind of, going after, what are we focused on as a business, and to make sure that the partnership and the overall supply chain is focused on that same outcome as well. And it takes a little creativity to come out for that. You can't have 1,000 different outcomes that you're measuring. You got to go after the critical ones. But that's the first key rule is focusing on the outcomes. The second one is focusing on the what and not the how. We've had, and I'm sure you've had experience with this. You sign an agreement. The first thing that the company will give you is a desktop procedure and a script, and say, we want you to do it exactly like this because this is exactly what we do, and we don't want you to change from it. And if you do anything different, we're going to be upset with you. At that point, you're just following rules in a script, right? You're not going to bring any innovation into the model. You're gonna keep the client happy, which is one of your key goals. So you're going to follow that desktop procedure, to a T, right? And that's not going to get you to that outcome, right?
No.
That's going to get you to follow exactly what someone has told you to do.
That would have to be transaction-based arrangement, because if I'm going to be compensated for driving an outcome, then I need to have a say as to how we get to that outcome.
Correct. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think kind of tying those two together is the third rule, which is having clearly and measurable outcomes, right? So this is there's kind of two things to this. Is one, not having 100 metrics, picking the right metrics so you don't end up with what's the watermelon scale, where it's green on the outside but really red on the inside. And really kind of focusing on, as Kate kind of described it, I loved her quote, the power of and. We want this and we want that. And sometimes those two things kind of conflict, and you have to really kind of balance the model in order to get that. But we want high net promoter score, and we want, let's say, a certain handle time or a certain, something or the other. They may conflict, and your job and the supply chain's job is to balance those out to create the best overall outcome, right? So that's a key in terms of making those clearly defined, measurable, so everybody knows what they're going after. And those ties together, those outcomes and the focus on the what.
And the other thing that's always sort of been in the back of my mind coming before I got into this more background similar to Alicia, who's hosting today, is marketing. What is the lifetime value of a customer?
Right.
And that's often not calculated when people are negotiating these things. What does it cost me as a company if Tim Cronin has a bad experience with me and decides he doesn't want to do business with us anymore? What's the value to that? How much have I just lost? Because, and sometimes maybe you lost that customer simply because you were trying to save money on the front end and do it for less, and you got less. And what happens is the long-term effect can be pretty notable.
Correct. I mean, just my personal kind of thinking is, you have two real keys. You have integrity and you have your relationships. And you can't let either of those kind of fall to the wayside. You can gain knowledge, you can learn new topics, those types of things. But to your point, that idea of a lifetime, if you fall down in integrity, you fall down in the relationship, it's a lifetime, not just in business, but personally as well. We go back, I can't even, I don't want to say how many years that may date me. But, when we've had problems at companies, first call is to a relationship that we have. And a lot of times it's you guys. So, those are key, and there's lifetime values, just not in losing customers. There's lifetime value in having customers and having those relationships and being able to utilize that, later on. So I totally agree with you.
Take it to the next step. Instead of dissuading somebody from staying with you, they become an evangelist, because
Correct.
And then they tell everybody in their family and every friend they have what an amazing experience they had with that company, and
Right.
you pick up more business. So those are sort of intangible outcomes that I think are often overlooked.
I totally agree with you. We talk about, another one of the rules is like, flexible pricing models that optimizes the business and unintended consequences. Some of those are positive and negative, right? So yeah, you can definitely have, unintended consequences where people will game the system. But there's positive unintended consequences that, come out of a career working with, a great group of network, and those are people you're going to call on in the future.
And I know we also talked about insight versus oversight governance, and that's really important too.
It is, and we talked about, earlier on in the podcast about control versus trust and those types of things. And like I said in the beginning, I've come from mostly regulated businesses, and trust me, we can put together an oversight committee really quickly. But the key to these kind of goals is not like standing over the partnership and calling out everything that's wrong. It's really kind of these relational governance models that allow free flow of conversation. Scorecards, let's say, we still run relationships sometimes with scorecards. They're not one way, they're two ways. We want to know as a company how we're doing as a company and what we can do better. And being open to that, that kind of two-way communication, I think is key in these types of relationships in order to, A, get them off the ground, and B, evolve them to become better every year, because as a business, we have to get better every year.
And I know you certainly have worked in regulated industries. How much more challenging does that make it? It creates a lot of additional loopholes.
It does, and you have to be creative in it, because take health insurance for example. You could be regulated by federal government, you could be regulated by a state, you could be regulated by a county, or a local organization. So all of these things, and they're never the same, by the way. If you work for a Medicaid plan that's in 12 different states, you've got 12 different regulations, no doubt. You have to put those all together. You have to kind of understand what it is, and you have to be able to kind of work within those boundaries, because they are your end customer. But at the same token, you have to find the flexibility in order to bring in, these innovations and bring in these kind of relationships. Sometimes you can't get past it. Like, there are sometimes rules. And you'll know this in the BPO space, where you can't take data to a certain country or a certain region or something like that. At the end of the day, it is what it is. And, you've got to be able to work under those constraints and those regulations. But just because you have those doesn't mean you have to kind of completely shut down the entire supply chain and work to the least common denominator.
Yeah. How involved is legal within that group? It's got to be a huge part of it, because there's rules, regulations, laws, whether it's legal stuff or whether it's regulatory stuff. You need compliance. I mean, it's just so vast.
It absolutely is, and we've in the procurement space, we've hired lawyers, we've had JDs work in procurement, and they can do that. But to your point, the key is assessing the laws, interpreting the laws, bringing back a risk management mindset to the laws, of this is what the law is saying, and this is what we're able to do and not able to do. But I think what's even more important to that is staying up to date on the laws. Every year, thousands and thousands of laws are getting passed, federal and statewide. So just because we signed a deal in 2024 doesn't mean that we have to stop looking at that side of the business forever until the contract's done. We have to assess it in 2025. We have to assess it in 2026. So staying on top of that's critically important. I think the biggest thing, and we talked about this earlier, is having a good partnership with the legal team and with the compliance team, with internal audit in the company. These are groups that, a lot of people kind of shudder when you hear, oh, legal is going to come into it. But when you have a good relationship with legal, they're your best friends, and they help the process go a lot faster and come to a better end product at the end of the day. And that's what we're after. So I think being close with them internally, letting the supplier talk to legal, whether it's legal to legal, or suppliers talking with the compliance team or the internal audit team. I think gone are the days where procurement is, the funnel of everything, and you're not allowed to talk outside of procurement, and I'm going to handle everything. We've got to kind of get past that and start to really make sure that if we say we're going to act like a partnership, we got to talk the way we or we got to walk the way we talk.
For sure. And that brings me to two questions, actually, both related to what you just said. Different questions, though. The first one is, a lot of companies look at legal, look at regulatory, look at what you can, you can't do, but then they still might be uber conservative or uber liberal. And so I'll use healthcare as an example, working with payers, and you work for payers. Some payers, even though it was okay, would never move anything offshore outside of the US,
Correct.
even though it was okay. And others were very quick to sort of, take leverage labor arbitrage and move into good English speaking countries and service outside. That, I guess, is more of a corporate philosophy than anything else.
Yeah, I think it's more about culture. You can be in very risk averse companies. You can be in companies that kind of want to push as far as they possibly can. I've had the luck and the pleasure to work with legal and compliance teams that really kind of take an overall risk management approach to it. To say, this is the risk that you're taking. Here's what could happen. Here's what can happen. Here's lines we can't cross no matter what. But these are areas where, this is a risk, and are we going to be properly rewarded, or performance is going to be improved because of it? So I do think it's culture. I've worked with plenty of outside, lawyers who are, just no, 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 you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this. And then I've worked with outside lawyers that are like, like you said, go until someone tells you you can't go. And it's one of the first things, like, when I've been at a company, or let's say a new lawyer starts, you always kind of want to, build that internal relationship and understand what their personal philosophy is, and how that will impact, the contracting and the relationships I'm going through. But like I said, I think taking an overall risk management approach and being really good lawyers, and understanding how the laws and regulations impact business is key. And like I said, I've had some great partners in the past.
It's really interesting to me, and clearly I've got some white hairs. I've been doing this a long time. But what's really interesting to me is how many companies were so risk adverse, they would never do any of the things we just talked about. And 4 years later, they're calling and they're going, "Hey, can we do that? I thought you wouldn't do that." They've all somehow, we talk about evolution, right? And evolution seems to be the theme of almost everything we're discussing this year. Even the evolution in the way the cultural thinking is going, is people are becoming more open-minded to everything from, I've talked with a lot of folks in healthcare about AI. You get a different opinion from everybody. Some
Absolutely.
folks think it's the greatest thing since sliced bread, and others are risk adverse. We can't. There's the HIPAA. There's PII. We can't let people. So it's just interesting to, as you deal with different organizations, to see different corporate culture, different corporate philosophy. The second question I had around that, though, and we did talk about this a couple of weeks ago, you talked about new legal person, and from a sourcing procurement perspective, let me develop a relationship. We've got to work. Talk to me about that, because we talked a couple of weeks ago about it's not all funneled straight through procurement. You just mentioned how the provider should be dealing with folks across multiple parts of your organization. How do you do that? How do you bring everybody to the table? I know we talked about, certainly when we were talking about what we're doing from a CX as a service perspective, we were talking about how you sort of get all the components together. But internally, you have to do that too. And we talked about getting the business folks to the table at the same time as the sourcing, as the legal, as everybody. How challenging is that for you?
It is a challenge, and I think a lot of it comes back to that trust, even internal to the company. I think a lot of procurement people talk about, I don't have a seat at the table, and I'm not providing value, and I want to get earlier in the engagement, as opposed to the deal's already kind of struck, and I get a red line contract and it's the first time I've seen it. And I honestly, I think that's our problem. Like, that's our fault in a way, because we're not building the relationship, and we're not providing that value back to the business or the other stakeholders. I want to be known, personally as someone, in the business and with business knowledge, not just a procurement person. And I think, making that step and understanding, what are the issues and, the goals of the business, as opposed to kind of sitting back and relying on, my procurement policy and my procurement process to, kind of build, let's say, my internal demand. I love procurement, and I could probably talk about it for days, as opposed to a podcast. But it's one of the few functions, I think, in a business that allows you to see, everything in the business. It's not as deep as, someone who's, running a call center, or, an accountant, looking at the finances, but we get exposure and visibility to a lot of different things. I think we have to take advantage of that. And I think we have to, go back to, whoever's running, CX or the call center in the company, and not just, kind of be a fly on the wall and a gotcha because, they didn't follow a process or a procedure. But we've got to provide real value back, to that group. We've got to look for new suppliers, new partners, new ways of doing things, and bring that back to, that other team. That's part of the job, is cultivating these new relationships. It's not necessarily just, my policy says, if it's over $50,000, you need to do an RFP, and you need to do this, and you need to do that. We definitely need that, no question. But we've got to do more and more, and it's incumbent upon, procurement or supply chain or sourcing or whatever you call your team in your company, to be out with those groups. So I think, when we look at things like CX as a service, and new ideas and all that, why shouldn't we be advocates, with the business, and bringing, compliance and legal into it early, so that, they can kind of see the pitfalls. Everybody brings value back to those discussions and that decision. And leaving someone out until the 11th hour is only going to create a roadblock. And we just need to bring everybody together and openly, discuss the new innovation that's out in the market. Otherwise, you're doomed to fail like your past mistakes.
Yeah. And sometimes when you bring that person in at the 11th hour, they're kind of not as cooperative as they may have been. And sometimes they want to create a bit of a roadblock just to make a point, like, you should have had me here sooner. And
They're not going to be very happy, that's for sure.
Slows down the process. Something else you said, which hit home with me, being in procurement really gets you a peek at the entire business, and it gives you a much broader understanding, as opposed to somebody that works in a particular line where that's all they see. Same thing for me, being in BPO for all these years. It's like, I've worked with folks from, media and entertainment, to healthcare, to financial services, to technology, you name it. And what happens is you don't become a subject matter expert, but you get a lot of exposure to different industries, and through osmosis, you just learn so much. It's really cool. Really.
Well, and putting the pieces together, and, here's something that worked over, in a software company that could be applicable in a retail company, or could be applicable in, this type of company. Those are keys. I told you a story of one company that I worked with that brought this new technology to, a back office operation. They probably could have licensed it. They could have used it on their own. They could have probably sent their salespeople in and said, "Hey, here's this new thing we want to add onto your contract." But in a quarterly review, where we were kind of talking about what could we do better and what are new ideas, they opened it up and said, "Hey, here's something we're working on. Do you guys want to be involved in it?" That wouldn't have happened if the partner didn't have exposure to other industries and brought that technology to, this industry. And it wouldn't have happened if we didn't have a good relationship and an open and candid discussion. So I think, putting that all together is really the magical secret sauce that you have to crack.
I agree. I'm going to close with one last question for you. The one everybody wants to hear the answer to, who is talking to a chief procurement officer. So, What are you looking for when we're out, when the sales guys are out selling, whether they're selling tech services, they're selling call center services, they're selling paper clips? How how do we best approach procurement? And do we approach procurement or do we go to the business? And we talked about this a little bit. We talked about going to both. But
Right.
really, from a business development perspective, a lot of folks watching this do what I've done for a living. They're going to be really interested in the answer to this question.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, we're looking for solutions to problems, and maybe they're problems we know we have, and maybe they're problems that we don't know we have. So I think, I think procurement has evolved, and this kind of ties back, to one of the very first things, whether you're in a season of cost cutting, whether you're in a season of, supply management risk or bringing in innovation. I think it's important through conversations and through asking questions and understanding the business that someone in business development or one of the partners knows what season that company is in, so that they can answer that question. There's no doubt that there are times when a company is extremely focused on managing expenses, right? So that's probably not the time to bring, a multi-million-dollar new idea to it. It's the time to bring efficiency. It's a time to bring, hey, this is something that you all could change within, my company to make it easier for us to do business, and therefore costs will get lowered. So I think understanding that by asking questions, and really good, business development and sales executives, that's what they do. They ask questions. They're not really pitching something. They're asking questions to understand, the business. I think, when we talk about, who do you talk to first and all that, really, it depends on the relationship. It depends on, I hate to say the path of least resistance, but where you're going to get heard. In an ideal world, business and procurement are working together, and, it's not one or the other, it's both. And that's kind of, what we strive for. I don't necessarily want, to say, no, you can only talk to me in procurement and I have to go talk to the business, because, well, first of all, I'm not naive. I know you're talking to the business anyway. Come on. But, we want to make sure that, it's a company talking to a company to solve a problem for our end customer, and wherever that comes in, hopefully we've done enough work on strategy. We've done enough work on the relationship that the input really doesn't matter. Now that doesn't always work, but that's what I think we're striving for. And I think as a chief procurement officer, when I see those two things happening, when I see that you're solving problems, and you're working with the company effectively and efficiently, those two things I can put together to kind of make an assessment of whether this is a relationship and an outcome that's going to provide, exceptional value to our end customer, and can be long lasting. And that, at the end of the day, is kind of what I'm looking for. I'm not looking for, a bid every year that's disruptive, that doesn't, bring a good ecosystem to the world. I'm looking for long-term partners that have, and I go back to using Kate's term, a vested interest in, solving the problems within the supply chain.
Great answer. I know everybody's going to hold on to that one for a while. Love chatting with you. I think we should do this again really soon. It's very interesting to me because the sourcing, procurement, legal piece of companies is a bit foreign to a lot of us.
Absolutely.
We roll with operations folks, we roll with client services type folks, we roll with technology, but this is a bit of the unknown for a lot of people, and thus the question. You and I think when we first met, I was introduced to you by the business, which we were putting a deal together.
Yep.
So the big question always is, hey, should I be pitching the sourcing folks at a particular company, and have them bring me to the business, or should I pitch the business? And a million years ago when we met, I pitched the business and they brought me to you. But after that, we worked together. So
Absolutely. And because, that's how the relationship started, and that's how it's formed, since then. It's kind of, I think, to kind of wrap up with this idea of evolution, it's a simple evolution to kind of bring transparency and relationships into business. And sometimes it's a little sad to have to say that. But that's still the case. And, we can all strive to do better, all across the different companies. It's not one person's fault or the other. It's just, something I think, idealistically, like we want to strive to do better. But I'll also say that, use your example. Yeah, you had the relationship with the business. That's all fair, well, and good, but you didn't exclude legal and you didn't exclude procurement. You didn't try to, work around with them. We created like this really good relationship in that company. And that's how we got things done. And if I recall, in record time.
Yeah, we did.
Right before an AEP. So that was a pretty interesting process.
Yeah, spoiler alert, it was healthcare.
Story for a different podcast.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, just to kind of close on that thought, I think 2 other companies you worked for in the same position, you called me and we worked together before I met the business. So it really is about relationship building.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Tim Cronin, thank you so much. It's always fun getting together with you. It's always informative. Really appreciate your spending time with us today.
Thank you so much, both of you, for a really great discussion. That was just kind of fun to sit here and observe. So that concludes another episode of CX On Point, and we are looking forward to recording the next one. And Tim, we are very much looking forward to welcoming you back. So that'll wrap it up for us today. Thanks so much.